evening, everyone. So many of you have heard that learning a second language is a good idea. It's good culturally and socially to be able to communicate with people who speak a language other than your native language. But what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the benefits that go beyond language learning. There are cognitive benefits to learning a second language. So one of the first researchers to talk about these benefits was Dr. Galley, who works in Canada. And she looked at 4 to 6-year-olds who were bilingual, learning French and English, or monolingual, only speaking English. And she wanted to know how their language experiences shaped the way that they understand language in general. And so she asked these children to perform a couple of different tasks. One of them, she told them, let's pretend that the sun is the moon and the moon is the sun. We're going to switch the names of these 2 items. And then she asked them follow-up questions. What would we call the thing that comes up in the sky during the day? And they should say the moon. But with this task, obviously it's very hard for young children to be able to change the names of things that they know. The thing that's in the sky during the day, that's the sun. And so they have to inhibit that idea and change the name to be the moon. Then she asked them other questions like, how would you define a word? Do these things count as words? And again, that's a very hard task for a young child to complete. And finally, she asked the kids if certain sentences were grammatically correct. So is the sentence, apples grow on noses, grammatically correct? And it is, even though that's really difficult to understand when it doesn't make any sense. And so these are the results of her study. You'll see that there are partially bilinguals. So these are individuals who don't have a great grasp of the second language, but know something about it. And there are fully bilinguals, individuals who are really good at 2 languages. So the first row here is just their vocabulary knowledge. So obviously the English monolingual children have higher vocabulary in English than the bilinguals do. And the fully bilingual children have a higher vocabulary in French than the partially bilingual children. That's just what's making them bilingual. But the second row is their performance on the sun-moon task. And you can see that both of the bilingual groups did better than the monolingual group. And at the bottom, you'll see on the word task, the fully bilinguals did better, and on the grammatical judgment task, the fully bilinguals also did better. So it seems like being bilingual is giving these young children an advantage at understanding language. But Dr. Bialystok wanted to know how far these advantages go. Do they go beyond just understanding language? So she gave these children and also young adults, middle adults, and older adults the task that you see here. They just have to respond by pressing the red button if they see a red shape and the green button if they see a green shape. So it's pretty straightforward, but the shape can appear on different places on the screen. So it can appear in the center of the screen, which is really easy. All you have to do is look at the color and respond. It can appear on the correct side of the screen, agreeing with the button press in the congruent condition. And so this is again easy. Your attention is already shifted to that side of the screen, and then you just have to press that same button. Or it can appear on the opposite side of the screen. This is the incongruent condition. And so here, your attention is directed to one side of the screen, but you have to press the button with the other hand. So this is the most difficult task. It requires a lot of inhibition. And so we should see the biggest differences between groups on this incongruent part of the task. And so here are the results for the young children again. We see that the bilinguals are slightly better than the monolinguals on this task. The bilinguals are the dashed lines and the monolinguals are the solid line. So there's not a huge advantage, but there does seem to be some advantage there. Then when we look at young adults, so college-age students, we see this advantage completely disappears. There's no difference between bilinguals and monolinguals in this age group. But then if we look at middle and older adults, we see this advantage gets even bigger. So again, the dotted lines are the bilinguals and the solid lines are the monolinguals. And in the incongruent condition in particular, the bilinguals seem to be responding much faster than the monolinguals. So why is it that we see this difference in children and middle and older adults, but not in young adults? One of the ideas is that this is just part of the developmental process. So in childhood, these abilities are still developing, and so we can catch children when they're in the middle of developing the abilities and see a big difference there. And the same thing in older adulthood, these abilities are declining, and so we can see that maybe bilingualism is helping them to decline more slowly than in normal monolingual adults. But at this peak age of maturity, between 18 and 35 years old, maybe everyone's just really good at these tasks. And so you're not going to see any difference between bilinguals and monolinguals because everyone can do the task very well. And so what I think is that this age group shouldn't be ignored. Instead, we should just start to look at their brains. And so this model was proposed by Butaleby and Green, and it shows the areas of the brain that are active for both language tasks that bilinguals have to do, for example, switching between their two languages or producing one language at a time, and for these types of cognitive control tasks, including the one that I just showed. So this network is made up of the prefrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, basal ganglia, and inferior parietal lobule. And all of these parts of the brain work together to produce these types of behaviors, but they also each have their individual roles in this process. And so beyond that, I'm interested in what the role of individual differences is in the bilingual population. So of course, when we talk about bilinguals, there's not one easy definition for a bilingual. Some people have learned their second language at different ages and achieved different levels of proficiency in that language and in their first language. And so I want to know, how do those different experiences impact the way that your brain handles these tasks? And further, are there any other things that are impacting your brain? For example, genetics obviously influence your biology, which involves the structure of your brain. And so it's possible that genetics are also playing a role here, and very few researchers have looked at the combination of genetics and bilingualism in predicting performance on these tasks. So some research that I've done recently looked at performance on 3 different tasks. One of them was a picture naming task. So you'll see that in the blue, English production. The bilinguals were producing the names of pictures in English for this task. There's also a nonverbal inhibition task, which is similar to the one that I showed you earlier. You're just responding whether a shape is red or green, and it can appear on different sides of the screen. And then the last one is a nonverbal task switching. So this resembles the idea of bilinguals having to switch between their two languages, except it's completely nonverbal. So you're switching between pressing buttons based on colors of objects that you're seeing and based on their shapes. And what we see here is that there seems to be kind of a dissociation between the activity in the frontal areas of the brain associated with language and the activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is associated with the nonverbal tasks. So it might not be that the system is completely overlapping. They might be kind of separate areas of the brain. But you'll see that language background is predicting performance on that inhibition task that I just showed you, and their English production. So by language background, I mean age of second language acquisition, English proficiency, and Spanish proficiency. So all of these go beyond just impacting their English abilities and actually impact their neural activity during these inhibition tasks. And then you'll see there's a gene that we're looking at, the DRD2 gene, that also seems to be impacting their English production. So all of this is kind of to say that yes, it's great for you to learn a second language. There are lots of benefits. The benefits to cognitive abilities are still a little controversial, although we do think that as you get older, these benefits exist. But in young adulthood, we should continue to look at the way that bilingualism is shaping the brain in order to determine whether it's really having cognitive benefits. And so in the end, you should learn a second language for multiple reasons, beyond just social reasons. There might actually be cognitive benefits to that. Thank you.